Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, lovers and seekers, those who are lost and those who are found. Let us begin. Tonight's fragment sports a headline that reads, Resolution, and the body reads as follows. When you know with certainty that your words will bring nothing resembling redemption, and everything one might call pain, that's it, the fragment, all of it. Now, let's get cracking. The fragment you have brought me, titled Resolution, carries a paradox already at its heart. Resolution, a word of firmness, of completion, of end and of decision. But the fragment does not speak of resolution in the sense of a happy conclusion, nor of a solved riddle, nor of reconciliation. It speaks rather of a hardening, a knowing, a certainty that one's speech will not redeem but wound. Here resolution is not harmony, but severity, the clarity of one who understands the inevitable cost of speaking. What is it to know that your words cannot heal but only cut? We are accustomed to thinking of speech as balm, as negotiation, as the possible opening of reconciliation. Yet here, the speaker accepts in advance that words will fail the work of redemption. Instead, words themselves become the carriers of pain, of rupture, of destruction. It is a strange thing to resolve upon speech, not because it saves, but precisely because it condemns. The fragment turns us toward the ethical tension between silence and disclosure. There are moments when silence shields others, when withholding truth prevents unnecessary hurt. There are also moments when silence becomes complicity, when withholding truth rots the air. The one who resolves to speak, knowing that speech will not redeem, inhabits this painful zone. He or she has already judged that the silence itself has become intolerable, that the silence no longer preserves, but instead deceives. And yet, the fragment insists, there will be no redemption in these words. This is not the myth of speaking one's truth as healing. It is rather the opposite. Speech here is not a medicine, but a weapon. Or better, not even weapon, because a weapon is aimed, intentional, while these words are not simply cruel. They are necessary, but their necessity carries pain. Perhaps we could say, such words are surgical incisions. They cut in order to expose, and the exposure will not soothe. To place this in the realm of philosophy, we might recall how the ancients thought of truth. For Plato, truth was liberation, to ascend from the cave, to leave the shadows, to glimpse the good. But for those still in the cave, truth is unbearable, even maddening. The eyes accustomed to darkness cannot endure the sudden light. And so it is with certain truths spoken aloud. They are luminous, but blinding. They do not redeem, at least not immediately. They wound before they free. What the fragment calls certainty is the philosopher's tragic recognition. Socrates, condemned for corrupting the youth of Athens, knew that his words would bring him pain, would lead him to death. Yet he spoke them anyway, resolved. His words could not redeem the city, but they mark the line of his fidelity to truth. Resolution here is the stance of fidelity to what must be spoken, even when speech destroys. But let us deepen this. What is pain in this context? Is it merely the discomfort of wounded feelings, the insult to pride, the sting of disappointment? Or does the fragment mean something more enduring, more existential, the kind of pain that rearranges a life? When words fail to redeem, they fail to reknit a torn fabric. Instead, they emphasize the tear. They clarify the separation. They say, in effect, there is no bridge between us, only rupture. Pain arises because speech becomes a mirror that cannot be refused. One can deny action, one can reinterpret gesture, but words crystallize reality. They leave no ambiguity. A spoken judgment pierces, because it declares reality in tones that cannot be unheard. We are here at the site of tragedy, the irrevocability of speech. Once spoken, words cannot be unsaid. The arrow loosed cannot be recalled. The tongue, small as it is, sets forests aflame. Thus the resolution to speak, when one knows that pain alone will follow, is akin to entering into tragedy knowingly. Think of Oedipus, who demanded the truth of his own origins. He pursued knowledge, even as those around him begged him to desist. The truth he uncovered brought no redemption, only pain, blindness, exile. And yet, he pursued it to the end. His was the tragic resolution to know, even when knowledge annihilates. Likewise, to speak, when speech annihilates, is the tragic counterpart. The fragment, then, is not about casual hurt. It is about tragic speech, speech that cleaves, that destroys illusions, that shatters the fragile architecture upon which a life has been constructed. Consider also the biblical resonance, the prophets, sent to speak words of judgment, not comfort. Jeremiah laments that the word within him burns like fire. He cannot hold it in, though he knows it brings only pain. His speech condemns Jerusalem, exposes its betrayals, announces exile. These are not words of redemption, at least not in the immediate horizon. They are words of devastation. Yet Jeremiah is resolved. To be silent would be to betray the divine compulsion. In such prophetic speech, pain is not a byproduct. It is the very texture of truth. Redemption may come later, after exile, after ruin. But the prophet himself may never see it. His role is not to redeem, but to announce. And so with our fragment, one speaks, resolved, not because redemption is assured, but because silence would be false. But let us not romanticize too quickly, for there is also cruelty masquerading as truth-telling. There is the self-righteous speaker who delights in the pain of others, who confuses bluntness with courage, who hides malice beneath the cloak of candor. The fragment, however, carries a weight that excludes this cheap cruelty. It emphasizes certainty, not indulgence. To know with certainty that one's words will bring pain is not to savor that outcome, but to accept it as unavoidable. The resolution here is grim, not gleeful. This distinction matters, for without it, we could justify every act of cruelty as necessary truth. No, the fragment's tone is sober, resigned. Resolution is not triumph, but burden. The speaker accepts pain as consequence, not as aim. What then is redemption? Why does the fragment deny it? Redemption suggests a future restoration, a healing, a lifting up. To redeem is to pay back, to cover over, to set free. Yet certain words, once spoken, can never be taken back. They cannot redeem because they do not close wounds. They open them. They cannot free because they impose clarity. Perhaps redemption fails here because the relational fabric is already too torn. Words can no longer save. They can only name the fracture. In this sense, the fragment resonates with the final moments of failed love, when one must say, "It is over." Such words do not redeem. They destroy the last vestiges of hope, yet to withhold them would be to perpetuate falsehood. Resolution is required precisely because redemption is impossible. We may think of Heidegger, for whom resolution, Entschlossenheit, was not simply decision, but an openness to truth, even when truth is dreadful. To stand resolutely before being is to refuse evasion, to accept the anxiety that reveals our finitude. Resolution is not comfort, it is exposure. It means saying yes to the abyss. Our fragment echoes this. The speaker is resolved, not because speech redeems, but because truth compels. To know with certainty that words will bring pain is precisely to acknowledge finitude, the impossibility of escaping suffering. Yet to remain silent would be inauthentic. Thus, resolution is authenticity at its sharpest edge, fidelity to truth even when it wounds. 10. We can also hear an existential register in this. Sartre reminds us that we are condemned to freedom we must choose, and our choices carry weight. Silence is a choice. Speech is a choice. To be resolved is to accept responsibility for the consequences of words, even when those consequences are painful. The fragment's certainty that speech will bring no redemption does not absolve the speaker. On the contrary, it intensifies responsibility. To speak is to choose pain knowingly, to inflict and to endure it. This is not escapable. It is the burden of freedom. And yet, perhaps, there is dignity in such resolution. not the dignity of reconciliation, but the dignity of honesty. When one knows that speech will wound, and speaks nonetheless, not out of cruelty, but fidelity, one inhabits the tragic dignity of the free human being. 11. Let us shift. What does this mean for community, for relationship? If words can only wound, what remains between us? Perhaps the answer is this. Resolution is not aimed at saving the bond, but at honoring its truth. Sometimes the bond is already broken, though appearances persist. To speak pain is to unveil reality, to release both parties from illusion. In that sense, while redemption is denied, there is still a strange form of liberation. Pain clarifies. It strips away false hope. This is not the liberation of joy, but the liberation of finality. It is the moment when one ceases waiting for the other shoe to drop. Resolution, painful, unredemptive, marks the end. And sometimes the end itself is a kind of gift. 12. I return to the fragment's cadence when you know with certainty the dash pauses us. Certainty does not come easily. Most of our lives are spent in ambiguity, in partial knowing, in hesitation. But resolution demands certainty. It is only when ambiguity dissipates, when hesitation collapses, that one can act. This is why resolution often comes late after much delay. We wait, we hope, we equivocate, because perhaps there is another path. Only when all such paths are exhausted does certainty arrive. And then, words come forth like the swing of a final hammer. There is something dreadful about this certainty, for it closes possibility. It says, there is no redemption here, only pain. To know this with certainty is to see the world stripped bare of illusions. And yet, it is also the moment when one is no longer divided against oneself. Resolution ends ambivalence. It unifies. Even if what it unifies is a path into pain. 13. Thus the fragment can be read as a meditation on the price of truth. Truth is not always sweet. Often it is bitter. And yet, to live without truth is worse. Resolution is the courage to pay the price. We might ask, what makes such resolution possible? Courage, yes, but also necessity. At a certain point, silence corrodes the soul. To withhold words becomes unbearable. Resolution arises not from desire, but from compulsion. One cannot not speak. This compulsion marks the boundary between cowardice and fidelity. To refuse speech when pain is certain is to choose the safety of falsehood. To resolve to speak is to choose truth, even at the expense of harmony. It is to say, pain is preferable to deceit. 14. And yet I wonder, is redemption truly absent? Perhaps the fragment speaks only of immediate redemption. Perhaps in the long arc, even painful words can redeem. For truth, though it wounds, can also purify. The incision that causes pain may prevent deeper infection. If so, then redemption is delayed, deferred, unseen. The speaker knows that his words will not redeem now. They will bring only pain, but perhaps, someday, in the one who hears, those words will germinate into clarity, growth, transformation. This is not guaranteed. It is beyond the speaker's control. Resolution requires renouncing such hope, speaking without expectation. And yet, history shows us many words that first wounded became seeds of liberation. Still, the fragment's tone insists, in this moment, redemption is not in sight. Resolution is to speak even without that horizon. 15. Let us pause and gather. Resolution is the acceptance of speech as pain-bearing truth. It is the refusal of silence when silence deceives. It is the courage to endure certainty that words will not heal, but wound. It is the tragic dignity of choosing fidelity over comfort, truth over illusion. This is no easy thing. It requires strength, but also humility. For one must admit, I cannot save. My words will not redeem. They will hurt, and that is all. To carry this knowledge, and yet to speak, is to shoulder the burden of finitude itself. In this way, resolution is an image of human existence at its most tragic and most noble. We are creatures of words. Our words fail, they wound, they betray. Yet they also testify, clarify, unveil. To resolve is to accept both sides at once. 16. I end with this. Resolution is not final silence, but final speech. Silence may feel easier, but it corrodes. Speech, though painful, releases. Resolution is not the triumph of redemption, but the acceptance of pain as the price of truth. Thus, the fragment reveals a deep law of human life, that sometimes the most faithful act is not to save, but to wound, precisely because the wound is true. Resolution, then, is not harmony. It is the tragic courage to speak when silence would be a lie.